All right, if you want to ace your exam, you've got to master the debate between Kuhn and Lakatos. But before we can even get to their big clash, we have to tackle this huge, fundamental question, one that really challenges all of social science.
So here it is. Can social science ever be truly objective? Like physics or chemistry? Or are our own values as researchers always getting in the way? Seriously, how you answer this question sets the stage for everything we're about to cover.
Okay, so to get a handle on this whole objectivity problem, first things first, you need to understand the two basic kinds of theories that researchers come up with.
And this distinction? It's simple, but it is so crucial. Empirical theory is all about observing and explaining the world as it is. It's just describing reality. Normative theory, on the other hand, argues for how the world ought to be. It's prescribing a goal, and that's all based on values. Now, Max Weber's take on this? Absolutely critical for your exam. He said, look, we can separate facts from values, but perfect, total neutrality, it's just not possible for a social scientist. Our own values are always going to influence what we even decide to study in the first place. So for Weber, objectivity isn't some finish line you cross. Nope. It's this constant, really difficult process of just trying to minimize our own bias.
So along comes Ernest Nagel, and he offers a pretty practical solution to Weber's big dilemma. He basically says, hey, don't pretend you have no bias. That's impossible. Instead, just be transparent about it. Put your cards on the table. State your value assumptions right at the beginning so they become part of the actual research, and then everyone can see them and critique them. Okay, so with that in mind, how does science actually change over time? Well, Thomas Kuhn's answer to this was pretty radical. He argued that scientific progress isn't some smooth, steady march forward. Not at all. He said it's a series of, violent revolutions.
And the central concept for Kuhn, you've got to know this, is the paradigm. Now, a paradigm isn't just a theory. It's way bigger. It's the entire worldview a scientific community shares at a certain time. Think of it as the official rulebook that tells everyone what questions are even worth asking and which methods are legit. Here's a perfect real-world example. Let's look at development studies after World War II. The dominant paradigm was something called modernization theory. It basically assumed that poorer nations just had to follow the path of the West, adopt capitalism, and they'd progress. But then an anomaly popped up, a big one. It just wasn't working for a lot of countries. This huge failure created a crisis, which led to a full-blown scientific revolution. The old paradigm was overthrown and replaced by a new one, dependency theory. So this four-step process is really the heart of Kuhn's entire model. You start with normal science, where everyone's just working within the established paradigm. Then anomalies start to emerge. These are problems the paradigm just can't solve. When you get too many of those, you hit a crisis. Confidence just erodes. And that crisis is only resolved by a scientific revolution, this messy, sometimes irrational overthrow where one whole way of thinking gets tossed out and replaced by a new one. That's the famous paradigm shift. All right, so Imre Lakatos looked at Kuhn's model of these chaotic revolutions and basically said, no way. He offered a completely different vision. For Lakatos, scientific progress is way more rational, way more structured than all that. So instead of these messy things called paradigms, Lakatos gives us scientific research programs. And you can think of these as much more organized, more resilient frameworks. Each one is built around a solid core of fundamental ideas. And this structure, this is the key to his entire theory. You have the hardcore. This contains the fundamental, absolutely non-negotiable assumptions of the program. It's like its DNA. You can't touch it. But surrounding that is a protective belt of other hypotheses. So when anomalies show up, scientists don't freak out and start a revolution. No, they just tweak that protective belt to account for the new data, and the hardcore stays safe and untouched. This whole process follows two pretty simple rules, which he called heuristics. First, you have the negative heuristic. This is an absolute command. Do not touch the hardcore, period. Then you have the positive heuristic, which is basically a set of instructions, suggestions for how to cleverly modify that protective belt to handle new evidence and keep the whole program moving forward. So for Lakatos, you see, scientific change is a totally rational process. Scientists aren't just, members of a mob in some revolution. They're strategists making calculated adjustments. A research program is considered progressive and successful as long as its tweaks to that protective belt keep leading to new facts and successfully explaining those tricky anomalies.
Okay, this is it. The showdown, Kuhn versus Lakatos. For your exam, you absolutely have to be able to compare their models directly. So let's break down the key differences point by point.
And this slide right here just crystallizes their fundamental disagreement. I mean, look at it. For Kuhn, the history of science is these long, calm periods that get shattered by chaotic, even irrational revolutions. But for Lakatos, it's a much more orderly competition, where you have these rival research programs that rise or fall based on one thing, their rational ability to adapt and make progress.
All right, let's quickly recap the absolute must-know essentials for your exam. But hey, before we do that final recap, just a quick reminder. If you want the full summary of this topic and some awesome interactive practice tests to really lock this stuff in, you can find it all right now at gradeguru.nl.
Okay, so what are the big takeaways here? First, that fact/value problem. It means true objectivity is a constant struggle in social science. Second, Kuhn's revolutions. He says science progresses through these chaotic paradigm shifts where one worldview completely replaces another. Third, Lakatos's programs. He argues science progresses rationally, with theories evolving by adjusting that protective belt around a hard core. And finally, the core conflict you need to remember. Is scientific change a non-rational revolution, or is it a rational evolution? So think about it. Is scientific progress a violent revolution, or is it more like a strategic renovation? Keep that question right at the center of your thinking as you study. It is the absolute heart of the debate between these two giants. You got this.